All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of The Urban Gardener. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today on this episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down below. Follow along with more garden adventures as we continue growing on The Urban Gardener. Today, we're going to be talking about the wildfires, the smoke that's in the air, and how that affects your gardens and all of that. I'm living in a valley here in southern Oregon, and we are just in a soupy mess of smoke right now. And as you can tell, I don't know if you can see right now, but right behind me there's the sun, and you can see that it's very dimmed out by all of the smoke that has basically blanketed our valley here. Now, a lot of this smoke is coming from wildfires from all over the west, even down in northern California, as well as coming up into this area too. Now, have you seen on the news or anything else, if you don't live here in this area, you've probably seen a bunch of coverage of all of the different wildfires that are happening here in the West Coast. Now, we're really kind of early on our wildfire season this year. It's actually shouldn't be starting for another week or so for when we usually start seeing some of the bigger fires. And we've been putting up with a lot of smoke here in my valley for the last couple of weeks solid. But what we're putting up with in smoke is nothing like what the people who are putting up with in the fires or who are directly affected by these fires. There's a lot of people who are being displaced from their homes. There's a lot of people who are just losing their homes completely. Down in Redding, California, we had, I believe it was called the Car Fire, and it really did some damage to the city and a lot of residents there. This is something that we're starting to see more and more each year as I don't know, the environment's changing or what, but in Southern Oregon, I moved here 6 years ago, the first couple of summers, and from what I know, from what I've heard from residents who've lived here a long time before that, they've never seen anything like what we've seen over the last 4 years. And it's been progressively getting worse and worse every year. So let's take a moment here. I'm gonna go sit down for a second here, and we'll talk just a little bit about the smoke and how it affects our gardens. So all right, we're up here on the rooftop and we're hanging out with our peppers, and we're just gonna talk just a little bit about how those of us who are dealing with a lot of this smoke, how it's affecting our gardens. Now, I don't know necessarily all of any of the science or anything, and I'm just starting to learn some of this stuff myself as I've been looking and researching anything. Now, if anybody else has done any good research themselves and has any other suggestions about how to deal with or take care of plants in this smoky environment, please leave any of those suggestions down in the comments below for anybody else who'd be looking for some of that information. Because some of us here on the West Coast or in other places that are dealing with some of these wildfires going on, this smoke gets in and it just sits. And as you can see maybe in the background right now, it just looks like it's a really, really cloudy day. To a certain point, you can't see any of the hills. There's lots of hills and lots of other things that you can see usually back there, but it's just smoke, and it's just laying on top of us right now, and that means it's also laying on top of our gardens. Now, all of our plants are having to deal with this smoke as well. Now, the smoke contains a lot of carbon, of course, and carbon for plants is good. I mean, as far as you could really be thinking right now, the smoke, I'm seeing really, really good green on all of these peppers and everything going on here, and they're doing just fine throughout all of this. So they're obviously breathing in and taking in a lot of that carbon and transferring it to us, not really effectively at this point in time with all of the smoke that we have, but you know, they're transferring out oxygen from that carbon. Even looking here right now real quick too, and I'll show a clip here real quick of some sunflower leaves and whatnot too, with one of the other things that you're really dealing with these wildfires. See all of this ash It's really starting to create a nice coat up on all of the leaves here on this sunflower. And the rest of the things in our garden too. Now, a lot of that ash and everything that's fallen down on there's got to be really clogging up some of these plant pores and all of that. So the ash itself has got to be causing some sort of really damage to the plants and holding back or doing some sort of things to them. And I'm not sure exactly the science on what that could be, but I can't imagine having a bunch of dust and a bunch of ash laying on top of a leaf and it being able to effectively collect the nutrients that it needs to in order to grow the way it's supposed to. One of the things I did read about though too was a lot of when you look up about smoke and your plants in your garden, some of the things you hear about a lot are people who smoking cigarettes and hang around or sit around in their garden and smoke cigarettes. One of the problems for that type of smoke is it contains a lot of tar. Same thing with the ash and everything else that's collecting onto your leaves and possibly clogging up some of those pores. The tar in the smoke itself can be collecting on the surface of the leaves as well, clogging up its ability to collect its nutrients that it needs to as well, hindering growth and all of that. I suppose the only thing I can say is that other than seeing some of the ash and all that sort of stuff starting to collect on the plant so far, I've been trying to keep them watered down to try to wash some of that off. But for the most part, I'm still seeing pretty good growth on everything. So the fires and the smoke and all of that, I have to say, is possibly not as significant of a problem for our gardens as we would worry about. But there probably are other things, as I said, that I'm not exactly knowledgeable on. And if you do have any of that research, please share it, because we'd like to know about that, especially those of us here on the West Coast who are really having to deal with a lot of this during our summers here. And it's just, one of the things I did want to mention is that, in thinking about this and wanting to make this a little quick episode and talk about smoke and everything comes from a lot of, I went to the National Heirloom Expo last year, okay? And we got to hang out and have a great time seeing all these great vegetables and heirlooms that were being grown and all of that. It was really kind of disturbing to come back home a couple of weeks later and learn that that same place, the fairgrounds that we were at, was then being used as a center for people, an emergency center for people losing their homes and all of that in the fires and the wildfires that had happened last year. And the same sort of thing is going on this year, and we're just getting started. And we have to really be out there and be mindful and thinking of how lucky we are really to be in our gardens and taking care of these plants. Even if I have to sit in some of this smoke, I have a garden. I have this thing I really enjoy, and there are a lot of people right now who are losing their gardens, and they don't have gardens. And as we're gardening and we're out there having fun and enjoying ourselves, maybe we can take just a minute or two and think about all of those people who are at a loss right now and probably wish that they could be in their garden. So all right, everyone, I know that maybe many of you out there are, and have been wondering about how and this smoke is affecting certain things, and I wish I really did have a lot more definitive answers on that. So as I said before, this is where I usually ask people to, hit me up in the comments section below. Please, if you do have any suggestions or any sort of thing that we could look at or knowledge in the effects of the smoke on our gardens, please fill us in if you can. And if we get enough information, we will talk about this just a little bit more, maybe again next summer, because as I said, this is something that seems to be more and more regular, so we're gonna have to see. I really hope that things will start clearing up and getting better, but it just doesn't look like it as what we've seen over the last few years. So once again, man, I really thank you all for joining me here today on this episode. Wish it was just a little bit more bright and more fun of an episode, but you know, there's some of the things that we do got to kind of talk about when we're dealing with our gardens and we're dealing with some of the different things of our different environments that we live in. So if you can, please give this episode a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Follow along with more garden adventures here on The Urban Gardener, and I'll see y'all again on the next episode. Fires that's getting started here, some of the first of the season. One of the things we got to be aware of at this time of year is it gets really hot. A lot of our dry lands are really susceptible to burning. Like last year, we saw a lot of damage here in Oregon, all over Oregon, and of course the really bad fires of last fall in California. Well, let's hope this season isn't as bad this year, but it's definitely getting started.